It's episode 111 of the Author Stories podcast. I'm your host, Hank Garner. Thanks for joining me each week as I interview the very best authors writing today. I'm very happy to have Robert Dugoni on the show today. Before we get into the interview, I'd really love it if you would go to hankgarner.com, check out the show notes, and visit our sponsors. They really do help bring you the best quality show that I can each week. This week, please visit thirdscribe.com. They're there to help authors take care of all the business of writing so that authors can get down to writing. Also, I don't know if you knew this, but as a reader, you can sign up at Third Scribe and they can help you discover new writers. So go to thirdscribe.com today and check them out. Also, editor Ellen Campbell. Ellen minces words like no one else. Go visit her at ellencampbell.thirdscribe.com, and if you're a writer, let her help you bring out the very best story that you can. Go visit Ellen Campbell today. Also, at hankgarner.com, there's some links in the sidebar there. There's one for Amazon, and if you go click on that and then do your normal Amazon shopping, we earn a small commission on that. Thanks for listening to the Author Stories podcast. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. I'm really excited. On this week's show, I have Robert Dugoni on the show. I got familiar with his work, like I do with a lot of authors I'm not familiar with, by browsing the Kindle store. I've told the story many times on the show of how I seek out new authors, and my oldest daughter and I kind of bonded over the first Robert Dugoni book that we found in my sister's grave. So I reached out to him and am super excited to have him on the show. Welcome, Robert.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. I start each show with a variation of the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or a storyteller?
Yeah, 7th grade. I was given a project to create a speech where I could either be a slave, an abolitionist, or a slave owner. Wow. And I wrote the story from the perspective of an abolitionist. And I got up to give the speech, and I was a kid in grammar school that probably got in more trouble than others. And I gave this speech, and when I was done, nobody clapped. And my teacher was sitting in the back of the room looking at me dumbstruck. I thought I was in trouble again. So she goes, "Follow me," and pulls me out of my 7th grade class. And I'm thinking, okay, here we go again. I'm going to the principal's office. And she went to 7B, which was the other 7th grade, and opened the door and brought me in and said, "Stand here." And she went up and talked to the teacher. About a minute later, she looked at me and she said, "Give your speech." And I knew at that moment that I'd done something good instead of something bad. And I just remember standing there and saying to myself, wow, this is what I want to do. This is really cool. Getting this type of reaction, emotional reaction from people with words that I put down on a paper, was really kind of a special thing. And, each of us, I think, is blessed with certain talents. Sure. And I was blessed with the ability to write. I wasn't great in chemistry or math or whatever, but I could always write. And so it was kind of a natural fit.
Well, one of the most fascinating things that I like to hear from people, and it's the reason I always start with that question, is because I feel like it gets to the heart of why we as storytellers, as writers, why we do what we do. And I love that you have a very definitive point that you can point to. That's super awesome. I had a similar thing like that in the 9th grade in biology. I wrote a paper like that my teacher sent to the local newspaper and had published, and before that I just kind of wandered through school kind of like you, as a ne'er-do-well, and but when that switch flips, it's like, okay, now I understand what this is all about. What did you do from there? So you get this immediate and very tangible reaction from people. How did you then take that, to continue pursuing that love?
Well, I when I went to high school, I did kind of the nerdy thing, which was I joined the school newspaper, and I was playing sports, but I was not the athlete my brother was, which in and of itself has its difficulties. When everyone you got a brother that's this great athlete and they're expecting the same out of you. Um, so I started writing for the school newspaper and started just pursuing that and taking my English classes, but I can remember getting assignments in English and, just being thrilled to be able to do them. So anyway, I wrote for the school newspaper, and in the process of writing for the school newspaper, um, met a gentleman who kind of came in and talked to our class about writing in college, and kind of one thing led to another, and off I went. So I really cut my teeth journalistically. I wrote on the Stanford Daily in college, and when I got out, I wrote for the LA Times for a while before I migrated over to law school. But writing was always something that was, pretty much from the seventh grade on, was something that was, in the forefront of what I was doing.
Was it ever a struggle with you? Am I going to be a journalist? Am I going to be a fiction writer? Can I do both? Was that something that you ever wrestled with?
Well, I probably wrestled with it more out of ignorance than anything. I used to write stories and stuff all the time, but I can't remember an actual thought where I said I'm going to make a living writing novels. I was gonna write I was gonna be a journalist. I was gonna be a newspaper man. And then there was kind of a host of factors that led me to go to law school. I'm one of 10 kids, and I like to tell people I come from a family of compulsive overachievers, and they were all going to medical school, and they were all becoming doctors. And to my mother's credit, I've never really asked her this question, but I remember her saying to me at the end of Stanford, she said, "If you live at home, I'll support you for a year if you want to try your hand at writing." And it just never really dawned on me what she was saying to me. And then, and you reach that point in your life, you're 22 and you think you're independent and you want to go, you want to go have your own career and all that kind of stuff. And so I went to write for the LA Times, but I saw all my brothers and sisters becoming doctors, and I thought, I better have a career. So I ended up in law school with a group of buddies, and which made it tolerable. And from there it's kind of a treadmill. You get on that treadmill and you just keep walking forward. And the next thing I knew, I was at a law firm and I was practicing law. To make a long story short, probably in about my third or fourth year of practice, I was sitting at my desk and again had one of those moments where the light just went on, and I just kind of asked myself, what are you doing? This is not what you had planned for your life. And I literally turned around that day, picked up the phone, and called the American Conservatory of Theater and asked them if they had any theater classes for the public. And they were starting that afternoon. And I signed up, and I went and I started doing classes on theater and acting and dialogue and all that stuff. And I found myself, performing in shows all over the San Francisco Bay Area, equity shows, pretty big shows up in San Francisco. And I think that really rekindled the whole love of storytelling and dialogue and expressing yourself and all those things. And shortly after that, I started writing again. And I'd go down into my basement and I'd try to write. And so, it's difficult when you practice law. The law is a career. It's not something that allows you a lot of free time. But that's really where it all kind of started again. And I began to pursue it more in earnest.
Now, when you called about the acting classes, did you equate that with writing at the time, or were you just looking for a creative expression? Were you saying this is a path to help me hone my writing?
It was creative expression. And
Okay.
There was obviously something inside of me that was saying, you're not getting fulfilled practicing law. You're not. This is not something that you're going home and feeling real good about yourself. You're not going home and feeling like you had a complete day. I was single at the time. I was a little bit older, and I was single, and so I had some free time, and those can be difficult years, I think, for a lot of young people trying to find yourself and discover who you are, and so acting became sort of a creative outlet for me, and I loved it. I loved the people that I acted with. I loved the whole atmosphere. I love theater. I still love theater. I just got back from London and Ireland, and I took my wife and my two kids to see Phantom of the Opera at the Queen's Theatre in London. And it's just one of those magical moments where you're sitting there in the audience and you realize I'm in London and I'm watching the Phantom of the Opera with my kids, and it brings tears to your eyes. And so that's really what the theater was for me. Is it was just this overwhelming expression of emotion. And I think that's what kind of brought me back to my writing. I've had people say to me with regard to my books that I don't write your typical thriller. I don't write your typical mystery. That they've gone so far as to say I write literary mysteries, which I don't know whether that equates or doesn't equate, or if it's accurate or not accurate. But I think what they're saying is there's more inherent emotion in my books.
Yeah.
People read my books and they'll email me all the time and say they were in tears and they were crying, and it really hit home to them. And I think that's a skill that God gave me, but I also think it's one that came through theater, that ability to sort of emote on the page and to bring those emotions out of the people that read it.
Yeah. I wholeheartedly endorse that view. My whole family are a bunch of theater nerds. All of my kids, I have 5 kids, and they're all involved in theater at some point or other throughout the year. And being in the theater and performing shows with them, or just being around watching, you start to you can tell when a show is good and when an actor is good. The dialogue flows and it is natural. But when it's bad, it's really bad. There's something about bad dialogue that's spoken aloud that is, it's like fingernails on a chalkboard. And that's been a theme throughout the show with various guests, is that connection between acting and writing dialogue, and getting the real sense of the way people talk and the way things are expressed. When you were in the theater and you were kind of rekindling this love, did you start picking up on things and say, you know what, I think I could write this better, or maybe I see how this is working and that makes me want to go write?
Yeah, what would begin to happen was, you would begin to think of plays. I would think of plays and I want to write, and what topics I'd want to write on, and you start experimenting with things, and I'd go to experimental theaters, for instance, in San Francisco, where you could do a scene and you could put the scene on. And the other thing that I was doing, I think there's a plan for all of us, and I think one of the benefits of practicing law was I took a lot of depositions. I mean, I must have taken over 1,000 depositions for reasons I won't bore you with. But when you take that many depositions, you learn a lot. You learn the way people answer. You learn they don't answer in full sentences. You learn when they're trying to avoid answering. You learn all kind of different things. People's mannerisms when they're uncomfortable. How they pause, how they hesitate, how they might look at you and smile uncomfortably. So there's just a whole host of talent there, if you will, that if you pay attention, and that's one of the things that I did a lot of. And so I reached the point where I could tell when someone was lying to me just by the way they were sitting, the movements, the mannerisms, and then you begin to really listen to what they're saying. When they're trying to avoid answering your question, I think it was just a laboratory for me of learning, and I had a lot of opportunities to do it, and I took advantage of those opportunities, and I think it's really helped me. That's not to say that I still don't have to work really hard at my dialogue. I think all of us do. Because written dialogue is not the same thing as you and I having a conversation right now. And so it's something that it's artificial, but the job of the writer is to not make it sound artificial. And that's a tall order, but it's something that you work very hard to try to master.
Sure. So what was that? You had this this epiphany at work, if you will, that okay, I've wound up where I didn't want to wind up, and I'm doing what I know I'm not supposed to be doing with my life, and you start pursuing theater and all that. How did that transition into, okay, I'm going to write a novel?
Well, it's sort of what you and I were talking about just a little bit earlier. Is you get the bug, you kind of get the bug, and you think to yourself, I can write this, I can do this, and you start writing theater, and in theater there's only two things you have, which is dialogue and action. Right. Which is the heart of any good novel, right? And so that's really all you have in theater. And so I started messing around with that, and then I started saying to myself, I got this idea for a novel based upon some time I had spent clerking for a law firm in San Francisco about this lawyer that was so good he couldn't lose. So I started toying with this idea, about a lawyer named David Sloan living in San Francisco and had this innate ability to get juries to do whatever he wanted them to do. And little did I know that I was actually writing the novel The Jurymaster, which is the first novel I ever had published. But it was terrible. I mean, I look back on it was horrible. But, you just kind of fumble your way through it. And then I started going to conferences, and you get to a conference and you start talking to people. It's like they start talking about books on the craft, and you're like, excuse me? And I started picking up books on the craft here and there, and I could write. I wrote for the LA Times, but writing a novel is inherently different than really any other type of novel writing. Any other writing. It's not a play. It's not a journalistic piece. It's not a brief, a legal brief. It's an entity unto itself, and I had to learn, I always tell people I teach now all over the United States, and I told, my job is to remove as many of the obstacles in the path to publication as possible, and those obstacles are just obstacles that we don't even start learning the craft, and so I started studying the craft. I started studying books like Chris Vogler's book, The Writer's Journey, and Saul Stein's book on writing, and others. And I just started learning sort of the techniques of what we were trying to accomplish in 3 acts, and, what you're trying to do in each act, and the climax, and, everything about it. And I just kind of started putting one foot in front of the other. When I teach now, I always tell people, you're much farther along than I was, because I really kind of wasted 3 years kind of not really knowing what I was doing and just kind of fumbling around until I finally realized, here's what the structure of a novel is, and this is how you go about doing it. And once you kind of get that down, it's like anything you've learned in life. Then you go for it. And, then your book is either, you'll at least have finished a book. It might suck, but you will have written a novel, a coherent novel. And then, you write the next one and the next one, and you hope you get better with every one that you write.
The David Sloan novel, you wrote a follow-up to that. How many of the books are there in that series?
There are actually 5.
Okay.
There are 5 out there. There's I don't know if I can remember them all, but there's The Jurymaster, Wrongful Death, Bodily Harm, Murder One, and The Conviction. And I wrote those books, and he was wildly popular, but the legal thriller was already at that point sort of dying off a little bit. John Grisham actually cornered it, or Scott Turow, whoever you want to believe. I've heard them both say they were responsible for the genre. But it was kind of dying down a little bit. It's not to say, that a good legal novel won't catch people's interest, like Defending Jacob. And so I started, for a whole host of reasons, really. I started looking for another type of book, and I started talking to my agent about doing something a little bit different, and doing something more along the lines of mystery and police procedural. And, again, I just believe everything happens for a reason in our lives. And in the book Murder One, which was a David Sloan novel, there was this Seattle homicide detective named Tracy Crosswhite. And she was a former chemistry teacher who had become a homicide cop, which is, in and of itself pretty interesting, until my agent asked me, why did she become a cop? And I said, I have no idea. And I really didn't. And she said, you might want to look into that. And I did. And, like all writers, I started the what if game.
Right.
What if this, and what if that, and what if this, and what if that? And, by the end of the day, I had my sister's grave. And, Tracy has become sort of a wildly popular character. I think for a lot of reasons. I think a lot of people identify with her and her whole story, that life doesn't always go as we planned, but you do your best to make the best of what you got.
I love that Tracy showed up in someone else's book, and then you had to figure out who she was. I love that. I've had that happen with characters before, and sometimes they wind up being way more important to you than who you thought was the most important thing in the beginning. I love when those kind of happy accidents happen.
Yeah. It was like I said, when I wrote the character, I would have thought Kensington Rowe, who was also in Murder One, I would have thought he would be the person that I would continue on with. But for whatever reason, I chose her, and I'm glad I did.
Who published the David Sloan series?
Well, that was kind of one of the whole problems with it. Is it varied. I started out with The Jurymaster was published by Hachette Books, and they did a fabulous job promoting it. I mean, The Jurymaster became a New York Times bestseller, and they really did a nice job for me. But for kind of a whole host of reasons, I ended up at Simon and Schuster, who kind of threw a boatload of money at me to get the David Sloan series, and I wrote the next four for Simon and Schuster.
That's awesome. When you decided to shift gears with My Sister's Grave, did you offer that to Simon and Schuster? Did you decide to do that in a different direction? What was well, first off, with My Sister's Grave, you said you kind of brainstormed that and had the idea. Was that difficult shifting gears outside of that kind of courtroom drama to the more police procedural, or did you just follow Tracy and followed what she did?
No, it was very difficult. I was very fortunate to have a good friend who worked in the King County Prosecutor's Office. So she had a lot of contact with a lot of different police officers, and so she really hooked me up. And I spent a lot of time and continue to spend a lot of time talking to two homicide detectives in particular. And one of the homicide detectives used to be on the CSI team. So she's really very knowledgeable. And then they hooked me up with a woman that's called a man tracker and, a medical examiner. And, you just start sort of accumulating this vast wealth of knowledge. But it took a lot of time for me to gather that and get to a point where I really felt, comfortable that I was sort of in the right realm. The other thing that you learn is, there's a lot of technology involved in the police work, but really almost always the bottom line is just a detective asking questions and following up and pursuing things. So I was excited about it. I was nervous about leaving the David Sloan realm, but things hadn't gone as I had planned at Simon and Schuster. For a whole host of reasons, myself included, and them. Things didn't go as any of us had hoped with the last David Sloan novel, and so I was kind of in a position where necessity is the mother of all inventions, and I really needed to kind of start fresh, and so that's why I created Tracy Crosswhite.
Another thing that is an obvious stark contrast between Tracy Crosswhite and David Sloan is you have a male protagonist in the David Sloan series, and Tracy is a female. How difficult was that for you, switching those gears?
Well, I made a conscious decision not to try to write from the perspective of a woman. I thought that would be an utter and complete disaster. And I think every guy out there that, has dated or has been married, realizes there's a distinct difference between men and women. We view the world differently, and we handle it differently, and our emotions are different. And there's certainly a lot of similarities, but there's also a lot of differences. And I have 4 sisters. I grew up with 4 sisters, and I just I said to myself, this really isn't about a woman. This is about someone that's been grievously injured when she was younger and has had to live with that guilt and conflict all her life. And what does that do to a person? What does that do to a human being, male or female? Male or female, it doesn't really matter. I mean, what does it do to a human being? How do they respond to that? And I honestly think women are stronger than men. I just think that's why God gave them the ability to have kids. I think us guys would be screaming our heads off and never do it again.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you've ever been in the delivery room with your wife, that there's obviously they're stronger than you.
Yeah, and obviously, I don't want to create stereotypes, but I think women are incredibly strong human beings, and so I wanted to create a character that was not only strong but very motivated because of her background, because of what had happened to her sister, and she feels responsible for it. And so she's motivated to try to find answers, and she has the skill to do it. And so I really just wrote from the perspective of a character, and tried not to get too much into writing from the perspective of a woman, because I knew that would be a mistake. I knew that women would fry me for it, because I wouldn't get it right.
Right. Without giving away too much of plots and things like that, where did the idea for the setup for My Sister's Grave come from?
Like I said, I was kind of looking for a new character and a new novel to write, and I was doing a lot of reading in the newspaper, and I came across an article in Washington State where they were taking down the dams to restore the wild habitat, the natural habitat of the salmon. And when you take down a dam, the reservoir of water above the dam, which has created a lake, obviously recedes back to its original size, a river. And, I just thought to myself, what if they found a body? And, there have been situations, obviously, where that has occurred, but I just started playing with the idea of what if they found a body? And then I started playing with the idea of whose body is it? And I had a whole bunch of really insane ideas as to whose body it was, until I kind of went back again and I started thinking about my own growing up, my own life, my own sisters, the relationships my sisters had, that bond that they have, which I don't think brothers necessarily share that same emotional bond. I think it's a different bond that we share. I share with my brothers. And so I said, what if it was Tracy's sister? And that's that what if game that we all do as writers. What if it was Tracy's sister, and what if she'd been missing for 20 years? And what if Tracy was somehow felt responsible for that? And, I just kind of started playing with that idea and kind of pushing my way forward to create it.
How long did it take to write that book?
That one was long, actually, and part of that was just because I was switching publishers and I was switching characters, and I was kind of switching genres a little bit, and so I would say that process probably took me a good 18 months. I would venture to guess that the time period between the conviction and My Sister's Grave is probably more than 2 years before that book came out. Since then, I've been kind of blessed that I've had ideas kind of come to me quickly with regard to Tracy, and I was able to write her final breath. And I just finished In the Clearing is out. It came out in May. I got a book coming out in September, which is a standalone, which I had been writing for a very long time. And then I finished the fourth book in the novel, fourth book in the series, which will be out next February. So these things all kind of differ, based upon sort of just how fresh the idea is to you, um, and how much research you're going to need to do to get it. It's it for yourself. It's really an interesting process. I mean, I wrote In the Clearing in probably 5 months. And like I said, I wrote My Sister's Grave in probably 18 months. I just, the book that will be out next February, which is called The Trapped Girl. There was a point in time when I was writing that book where I had no idea what it was about. I was ready to kind of just, put it in a can. And then all of a sudden one day it just started coming together, and I was able to finish that, even though I bitched and moaned about it a lot. And my wife will tell you. I was able to finish that in like 8 or 9 months, which is fairly pretty quick for a full length novel. So, for me, the difficult thing is getting the idea. I'm working on the new novel now, and I have the basic premise, and my publisher loves it, my agent loves it, and I just don't love it because at present there's just not that emotional grip. There's not that one thing that's going to really grab people. That In My Sister's Grave and In the Clearing, that they all had that feeling of hopelessness, that feeling of a lost life that didn't need to be lost, and what are the consequences of that. And so right now I just feel like the idea I'm working on is just too esoteric and it's not personal enough. And so it's going to take me a while to kind of hash this out.
Gotcha. My Sister's Grave is published by Thomas and Mercer. What was it like getting connected with them and starting this new relationship with a new character?
They have been unbelievably fantastic. When we were shopping My Sister's Grave, they asked if they could take me to lunch, and I'm a Seattle guy, and so I said sure, and I really didn't know what to expect. But the best way that I can equate it is I went to lunch with about 12 people, and I was the oldest person at the table by more than 10 years.
Oh my goodness!
And it reminded me of my good friend, my good former roommate Gil Arno, back in Philadelphia, who became chief legal counsel for MTV. He was working in Los Angeles at the time. I went down to visit him, and by the time I got done on a tour of the facility, I got back into Gil's office, and I said, "Where are all the adults?" And he laughed and said, "It's the music industry, Bob. It's the music industry." And and that's kind of how I felt about Amazon. Is you just had, you had all these young people that were energetic and hyper aggressive, and they wanted to sell your book. They wanted to get out there and promote it. They wanted to succeed. They wanted to do well. And they just blew me away. I got back and I called my agent and I said, "I want to go there." And she just said, "Okay." That's what, they hadn't even made an offer yet. And I had already said, that's where I would go. I mean, for a writer, I think there's so many different ways to be published nowadays. For those writers that are writing for a publisher, the number one thing you want is to feel like your publisher is invested. They're invested in you. They're invested in the novel. They're invested. They're out there. They're going to push it. It's a cooperative relationship, and with the bottom line, obviously, making money, because that's what we do. And that's where you kind of have to have a business aspect, a business side to you in addition to the creative side. But getting back to what I was saying, you want a publisher that you feel is invested in you and wants to see you succeed and is doing everything they can to see you succeed. And I just feel like that's Thomas and Mercer for me. They have been invested in me from day one. They have gone out of their way to promote me worldwide, to get my books out there. And I think what you're seeing is the fruit of that labor. It's a well-written novel that's being promoted by a very strong publisher, and the result has been, a lot of sales.
Well, and when your publisher is a subsidiary of the largest bookseller, by far, that's a pretty sweet deal.
Yeah, it definitely is. But we all have to be a little careful too, because Thomas and Mercer is not Amazon. I've done radio shows where I've been asked to come on, and they'll talk about Amazon the retailer, and And Thomas and Mercer is really not Amazon the retailer. There's a wall there. I mean, call it what you want, but they're really not in that same thing. And we're not in the same category as self-published Amazon authors. But when you stop, you're absolutely correct. When you stop to consider that most thriller writers sell 60 to 70% of their books. Sell 60 to 70% of their books electronically now, and for me, it's even higher than that. Wow, I mean that's it's certainly nice to have somebody there that knows the algorithms and knows how to get out there and sell it. I'll give you a small example. My Sister's Grave has been out now for 3 years, and I just received an email today from my German publisher telling me that they were going, for the month of July, they were going to discount the book to $1.99 in order to promote the release of Her Final Breath, which they're about to release at the end of July. And people will sit there, and this is three years later that they're doing these promotions for a book that's been out for 3 years. And there'll be people out there that'll say, well, that's not a lot of money, but when you sell 60,000 books in a month, I don't think you or I or anybody else is going to complain about it,
Oh, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Now you bring up a great point that I'd really like to get your perspective on. You published the first David Sloan book in 2008, is that right?
David Sloan. Let's see, 2006.
2006. Okay. So 2006. So we're talking 10 years now. That's way before the Kindle revolution. I'm assuming ebooks were, if they were on the scene, they probably weren't accounting for much then, were they?
No, not at all.
Yeah. No. How have you seen the industry change in those 10 years? You said that the vast majority of your books now are ebook. Do you see that as in the long run as helpful or hurtful for you as a writer? I'm not talking about the industry and all of that. How do you see that it has affected you, your career, and how people find you?
Well, obviously it's the business has changed night and day. I can tell you from my perspective that when you have 200,000 people download your book for $1.99, how many of that 200,000 are going to then go and buy your next book at its regular cover price of $5.99 or $6.99, whatever it is? 50,000, 40,000. That's still a hell of a lot of books. My perspective is this: from a writer's perspective, I've always wanted my work to be read widely. I've always had enough confidence to believe that if I could get enough people to read my book, they would sell my book for me. They would go and tell all their friends about it, etc. And that's exactly what happened with My Sister's Grave, and what has happened with the 2 books in that series that have followed. Is people have gone and they have told their friends, their family, whatever, and they really sell my book for me. And that is how books are sold. Whether you're with a big 5 publisher or not is irrelevant. They're not sold by advertising. They're not sold by promotions in this. They're not even sold by whether you're on the New York Times bestseller list. They're sold by one person telling another person, have you read this book? Because it's really good. So from that perspective, it's been phenomenal for me, because they've gotten my book in the hands of hundreds of thousands, probably millions of people at this point, millions of people. From a reader's perspective, I think this is important for us to acknowledge, because I think it gets lost in the shuffle. I get emails all the time, and I mean all the time, from people who are housebound, people who are suffering from cancer, people who have an illness which prevents them from going to a bookstore, who will say to me, I read 10 books a week, and I can't afford to even pay $7 for a paperback. And I just wanted to thank you, because I was able to download your book for $2.99 or $1.99. That is an incredibly heartwarming uh, positive, emotion wrenching experience to have an email with somebody that is dying of cancer, but has taken the time to write you to say thank you because of the pleasure you have given them in a book you have written. And that's an incredibly emotional, tear-jerking thing to have someone do, write to you and say. And, that makes it all worthwhile. It really makes it all worthwhile. And it makes me feel good as a person. It's a neat thing.
I don't know about you, but I was not prepared for the first email I got like that from a reader that said, when I had written a particular story and someone wrote me and said, this really touched me, this, brought out emotions in me that I didn't know I had, or, even, once I had someone say that a story of mine inspired them to go, make amends with someone. And the writer very rarely, I think, has those intentions in mind when we sit down to write a story. What advice would you give people to kind of deal with those situations when you start getting that writer feedback? I think a lot of us prepare for negative feedback and we're prepared to listen to critics and things like that. But I think we are rarely prepared to deal with some of that positive feedback and how when people say that your story really touches them.
Yeah, I think it's humility and sincerity. I really do. I mean, I think, like yourself, it's important to recognize that the person that is emailing you has taken time out of their day, maybe time out of their cancer treatment. They've taken time out to just say thank you to you. And I think we have to receive that with a tremendous amount of humility, because it's something that we don't get every day in our lives. Most people go to work and never have anyone say thank you to them. And so when someone does that, I think it's important to recognize just what they're doing and how they're doing it. And conversely, we all get the negative emails. We all get the Amazon postings. And the best advice I ever got from that came from a friend of mine named Phil Margolin, a writer named Phil Margolin. And, Phil just said, everybody that writes one of those reviews is 100% accurate because it's their opinion. And, you just have to accept sometimes that, that's their opinion. And, it is what it is. Sometimes it can be almost humorous if you allow yourself to kind of smile at it. When 95% of the people out there have given you 4 or 5 stars, and then somebody comes in and gives you 1 star and wants to tell the whole world what's wrong with your book, it's kind of humorous. Because in a sense, if you can look at it this way, you just realize they didn't get it. It was just never going to be the right book for them. And so it becomes almost comical at points.
Yeah. You said earlier that the best way to sell a book is through recommendation, that someone loves your book and then recommends it to others. One thing that has changed in the publishing and book buying process with ebooks now is that sometimes we use those Amazon reviews as recommendations. Maybe we don't hear from a personal friend or family member, but we browse through the Amazon store and then we read those reviews to kind of get a sense of what people are feeling about it. My Sister's Grave at the time of this recording has 9,859 reviews. How long had the book been out? First off, that's an amazing number, and they are overwhelmingly positive reviews. But how long did it take for this book to get a hold and to really start connecting with readers?
It took about a month. I remember after about a month, all of a sudden, reviews were coming in 100 a day, 200 a day. I mean, they just started really flowing in. And it took about a month before people started really talking about the book. I did a couple years back, I did a Christmas event with a guy named Dan Brown that wrote a book called The Boys in the Boat. And, I had actually read the book and I thought it was a great book. And I knew he was going to be down there, so I wanted to get it signed by him. And he said to me, he goes, yeah, no, it just actually, 6 months out, he said, just actually hit the New York Times list. And I said, no kidding, that's great. Congratulations. Boy, that's kind of late. He said, yeah, my publisher's actually sending me back out. And,
Wow.
I think people have to kind of, that's not a traditional story, but, that's what I mean about people talking about your book. He
Yeah.
wrote this incredible book, and it just took a while for people to get out there and read it and start talking about it. And once they started talking about it, it's really started flying off the shelves. And, he was just at some event with President Clinton, who had read his book. So,
Wow.
all these things have kind of a different life of their own. But really, I go back to, I go back to the readers. You need to get readers to talk about your book. You need to get them to be interested in it and to start selling it for you. And that's really the best way.
Can you point to anything that happened with My Sister's Grave, the first Tracy Crosswhite book, that got people talking? Did you do anything different marketing wise? Do you think that the story itself just lent itself to kind of generating that buzz? As looking back, do you see anything that happened differently?
Yeah, I mean, I think all those things. First off, Amazon put my book up as, I forget the name of the program, but it was one of 4 books that Prime members could download for free. And they were able to do it for a month. And that's a really scary thing for an author, right?
Kindle First?
I think it was called Kindle First. So in that 1 month, pre-publication, Prime members downloaded like 200,000 copies of the book.
Wow.
There's been some really, really good books that are put up on that program, but there's also been, some books that people, for whatever reason, really haven't liked. And so, I think a lot of people sort of, plugged their nose and downloaded my book, not really knowing what to expect. But then I think the other thing is writer generated. Once you put a book out there, you have got to put the best book you can every time. There's no room for putting out a crappy book, because you never know which book is going to be the first book of yours that someone is going to read. And I was just very blessed again that I had written a book, I think, that touched people on a number of different levels. Emotionally, it was vivid. It had sort of a raw appeal to it. It touched people on a very sensitive nerve. That I think we've all been in a position where we've had moments in our life that we wish we could have over again. But we don't get those back. And so, we have to live with our actions. We have to live with what we do. And, in this situation, it's something that is going to haunt Tracy forever, because, one simple act on her part, unintentionally, led to her sister, disappearing. But I think for all of us, we all can relate to that. And I think what I was able to do was write a book that people could relate to, that was emotional, that people, could identify with, and it kind of touched people in the right way.
Your books are very have very intricate plots and lots of characters. Are you a pantser or a plotter?
Yeah, no, I'm an organic writer. And I think that's part of the problem when I'm struggling with this new idea, is because I'm kind of trying to outline it a little bit. What generally I do is I get the idea for the book, and I kind of know what I want to do. Like I know how I want to start off this new book that I'm working on, but I just want to have a little bit better feeling for the MacGuffin, for the writers out there, for that thing that's going to drive the story forward. And once I have that, then I'm able to sort of just begin. And you know, the beginnings of the book for me tend to be pretty straightforward. It's the middle of the book that's always the most difficult for me. And you kind of reach a point where you have to just trust your instincts. You have to trust your abilities. I'm not an outliner. I know some people, you know, outline and they're very good at it. I'm not, and I never have been. And so I really write drafts. And I know when I've written my first draft, my goal is not to write, you know, an incredibly great book. It's to write a book where I can get from A to Z. And once I can get to Z, then I know I can go back and fix what I need to fix. And you know, I'll write many drafts of my books. I'll write 5, 6, 7 drafts of my books. But that's kind of my way of outlining, is getting it out on paper, seeing what I have, and then going and kind of correcting it from there.
So your first draft is a really long outline.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I mean, I know when I'm writing certain scenes that they're going to be cut. I mean, I just know it, because it's not moving the story forward. It's not revealing character. But it's something that I need. It's a transition that I need to get to the next scene. So I'm writing it for me. I'm not writing it for the reader. I'm writing it for me. And then I go back and I do a lot of cutting from my drafts, you know, especially from the beginning of the book, because as you know, as a mystery and thriller writer, you got to get a book moving. You can't take too long to get it to move, but at the same time, you got to let the reader know who your characters are. So there's kind of a balance, a dance there that you're doing. But yeah, I will know when I'm writing a scene that it's a transition scene, and it's never gonna be in the final book.
Gotcha. Are there more stories for Tracy Crosswhite?
Yeah, let's hope. I just signed another 4-book deal with Thomas and Mercer. I'm real excited about. So this book that I'm working on now will be the first in that series, and they want at least 2 of the 4 books to be Tracy books, and the other 2 can be standalones, depending on what I want to do. But I think Tracy's got a lot more in her, and there's some interest down in LA that my LA agent is dealing with and working on, and so I'd like to have a bunch of books written, you know, that we could draw from.
Yeah, I would love to see Tracy done as a really great television series.
Yeah, wouldn't it be fun?
You know, that would. I was thinking movie, but no, I think I would love to see like a Longmire or type serial. That would be amazing.
Yeah, no, Tess Gerritsen's book Rizzoli and Isles, I think it went for 10 years. But it's something that, yeah, it's definitely something that I'd love to see it come to life, just because I think it'd be a kick in the pants. But so yeah, there's definitely more Tracy books on the way.
Excellent. Robert Dugoni, thank you for taking time out of your very busy schedule to come on the show. Where can people find you, get plugged in with your work, and start following everything that's going on with you?
Sure. Well, thank you for having me. I think I mentioned off the air that this was a nice break, because as most writers have, I'm having one of those days where I'm not getting very far in terms of what this next book is going to be about. So this was a nice diversion. But I can be reached. I have a web page which I try to keep updated as much as I can. It's just www.robertdugoni.com. I'm on Facebook and I'm on Twitter. It's just at Robert Dugoni, I think. And I really do my best to respond to readers, either on Facebook or on my website. So it's fun for me to interact with readers. It really is, and I do my best to try to get stay in touch.
Excellent, and I'll put links to all that in the show notes. Robert, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.